when I was younger, I was a big fan of the earlier Gerry Anderson shows like Fireball and Stingray, and certainly Thunderbirds. And I was very inspired and impressed by a lot of the miniature and model effects by Derek Meddings and his crew. And I basically had a look at it and I thought, God, I'd love to do this. So basically, from the age of like 8 onwards, I acquired a 8mm camera and basically played about with that, doing stop motion and animation, model work, plasticine animation, all that kind of stuff, in order to try and self-educate myself in the sort of techniques that they would use. And then I went on to 16mm when I started to actually earn some money when I'd left school, and I basically learned a lot of the basics of the visual effects techniques that were current at the time. And then years later, from a friend of mine, I plucked up the courage to actually show Gerry Anderson some of my efforts, and which was quite embarrassing because the film was actually physically spliced together with sellotape, and it kept breaking in the projector. But Gerry was really patient and seemed to be politely impressed, which was really nice. After I'd shown Gerry my amateur work, I actually systematically kept in touch with him over a period of like a year, during which he started to develop what became Terrahawks. And I got a call out of the blue, which was amazing, basically saying, can you draw? Are you any good at artwork or whatever? And funnily enough, it's something I'd spent a lot of time honing as well. So I sent him some examples of artwork that I just happened to have lying around, which were actually cobbled together overnight, very specific to Gerry and Gerry's kind of work. And I sent it on to him, and he seemed suitably impressed, and then basically said, look, I need someone to start designing some vehicles and craft for this show. Are you interested? And of course, yeah, absolutely. So I jumped to that opportunity and did some of the concept designs, which ultimately some of which ended up as the designs for the craft. So that was my initial involvement. I wasn't actually physically involved with the production at that point, but that's how it started. Well, the next thing that happened basically was he said, can you do storyboards, because we need a storyboard artist to start working out all the sequences for the launch sequences and various special effects. And again, I said, yeah, I can do storyboards. And I went down to British Studios, which was quite a nice place where originally Hammer horror films were being shot. And while I was based there, I banged out various storyboards and concept designs for the craft. Ultimately, he hired an experienced special effects guy, but they didn't really hit it off when we got into filming. And I think more in desperation than anything, although I'm told he'd had this planned all along, he turned to me and he said, do you think you could take charge? And I did a big gulp, and yeah. I mean, I was just sort of so full of whatever. I thought I'd give it a go, and I think it was basically the biggest crash course on special effects I think anyone could ever experience, and I jumped in the deep end. And I think a lot of the earlier episodes are particularly creaky because you can see me on a massive learning curve, but I was lucky to be surrounded by a lot of very talented, experienced people, and such as Harry Oakes, who was a veteran Gerry Anderson special effects cameraman. And I thought the level of the work sort of improved quite quickly. My role as special effects director would initially be storyboarding I continued to storyboarding the model action sequences and what have you. I would then take them on the stage, show them to the camera crew and model makers, just say, look, we need a model of this big to do that, whatever. Then a week or so later, whenever the model was ready, take it on the stage, and I'd line up the camera and work out the camera speeds and all sorts of stuff that we'd shoot the various effects and pyrotechnics. The Battlehawk was basically Terrahawks' equivalent of Thunderbird 2, which is a big transporter aircraft that would basically ferry all the various bits of hardware and what have you to the site that or battlefield or whatever that they'd engaged Zelda and our foes. The Terrahawk was a craft, I think, nestled on the back of it, which was basically a mobile command center that, if necessary, could take off and land and observe the action from a different vantage point. As models, if I remember right, the Battlehawk was about 4.5 to 5 feet long and flown on wires like most of the craft, as was the Terrahawk. I did the basic designs for both craft. I have to say that the interpretation of them was not my take on them. I thought the Battlehawk ended up looking like a flying brick for a start off. And Harry Oakes, the cameraman, used to complain about it because it had these flat, shiny surfaces and they used to reflect light straight back into the lens and give big lens flares, which he hated. So I came up with the initial concepts, but they were interpreted by somebody else. The Battlehawk launch sequence required the White House to actually physically open up in sections, which was the most ludicrous concept I think ever, because you sort of thought, well, what the hell's happening to all the furniture and people inside as this is going on, which was never really explained as far as I'm aware. Anyway, that came apart, revealing the launch silo that the Battlehawk came out of. That was a miniature, which was, I think the whole house was roughly about 4 or 5 feet across. In other words, it was way too small to be believable, but worked in that little fantasy model world. You know, the Battlehawk being flying out of it was actually achieved by pulling it up on parallel wires with a little pyrotechnic coming out the back, simulating the engine exhaust. The Hawkwing launch sequence, if I remember rightly, would start down a launch tunnel on an overhead rail, and it would ultimately emerge out of, in a vortex of water. The vortex was achieved by basically building a conical, inverted conical shape where we swirled water around inside it, and then a tiny sort of 2-inch in scale, a 2-inch wingspan Hawkwing would be lifted out on a single monofilament wire and shot at 120 frames, high speed, just to slow everything down, give the water mass, what have you. The Space Hawk was the only part of the Terrahawks hardware that I'd had no involvement in its actual design. That was designed by a chap called Phil Ray, who was a model maker I knew of. In fact, he'd introduced me to Gerry, who'd done work on things like Alien and what have you, and he basically cobbled together that model. It came across for a lot of cruel remarks in that it was blatantly covered in a lot of Bic razor bits and pieces, and so it was known as the Razor Hawk to us, you know, for a close shave. You know, what, that was a close shave, you know, when it just misses an asteroid or something. So, but I thought photographically it looked pretty impressive on film, so that's what counts. I don't care how they're made, as long as they look good. The Tree Hawk was funny enough a craft that came out of a tree that split in segments. It was very much modelled on the Thunderbird 2 palm tree sequence. You know, the way the palm trees parted in Thunderbird 2. So you'd have this lovely sag and what have you, which we shot at high speed on the model. And once again, that was yanked out of the centre of the tree on a pair of parallel wires with a CO2, if I remember, gas effect for the exhaust. The Overlander, I thought, was the first really successful vehicle we had in the show. I came up with the basic design, but the model makers we had build the thing, I think, were also into the concept, and I thought they did a terrific job. And it was a kind of conscious, unconscious homage to the vehicles that Derek Meddings had used in you know, the earlier Gerry Anderson shows. We made a great feature of its suspension, so it had these huge rubbery tyres and what have you. And once again, that thing was pulled along on a wire, very fast across a model terrain, and then by shooting it at high speed, in other words slow motion, we gave it this great mass, and I thought it was the most successful of all the vehicles we had on the show. Our special effects stage, which funnily enough was a special effects stage used on Space 1999, had a small model workshop right next to it, so we had a very close rapport with the model makers and what have you, and we worked very closely as a team. I think at its height we had 10 model makers in there, which dwindled down to a sort of 6 or 7, and we had I think if I remember rightly 6 or 7 on the stage, so it's quite a small unit. And I remember when Derek Meddings came around of Thunderbirds fame to visit us, he was very surprised at the small scale of everything. About sort of 100 yards or so away from us was also, we had the puppet stage, and they had their sort of allied prop shop and workshops and costume shops and things like that. We had very little even though we were so close, we had very little to do with them unless we were blowing one of them up or whatever. We had very little crossover, which I believe was very similar in the original days as well. There was massive rivalry between the special effects people and the puppet people, and we used to quite often, as you do with these kind of Gerry Anderson shows, have a lot of pyrotechnic effects, and some of the even though they look visually spectacular, they also were very loud, and quite often we wouldn't let the puppet people know we were going to let off charges intentionally, so we'd screw up some of their takes. And we went to great lengths to hide the wires that the models were actually flown on and supported on by basically using coloured powder and a spray called anti-flare, which would dull down any shines and things like that. Also used a lot of just aerosol sprays, you know. So for example, if I had the thing against the sky blue backing, I'd use sky blue paint. And also Harry Oakes, our cameraman, was very experienced in sort of flagging off and hiding a lot of the wires. And luckily, when the things are actually in motion, the wires would disappear anyway. I'd be given a script. I'd go through it, do little thumbnail drawings. I'd identify which craft appeared, new craft in particular. I'd then do a concept sketch, usually in the bar, usually adjacent to the studio. I'd then give that to Nick Finlayson, who was our sort of head of department model maker, and he would set some of his guys on the task of actually manufacturing the model to our requirements. I'd give them a scale and basically what it had to do, and we took it from there. And usually they had to turn these models around in about 2 weeks, sometimes less. Some of the effects I'm particularly proud of in that show, considering the resources or lack of it that we had, were the space effects. Used a technique which is very similar to one employed in Space 1999, where you'd use multiple exposures in camera to achieve stars, planets and spaceships. So invariably we'd start with a shot of the spaceship doing an up and past against black, and I would mark on a monitor that we had a video feed through the camera from where the spaceship had gone. The film would then be rewound, and then using a piece of glass with paint, black paint on it, I'd peck little tiny holes in it. We'd backlight that and get a star field. The wires that all the craft were flown on were usually tungsten steel, which made them ultra thin but ultra brittle. So quite often we'd have, if a model was flown too fast or whatever, or had to suddenly change course, you'd see a ding and then a crash as the model hit the floor. So we kept our model makers quite busy. The funny byproduct of that was that the models, the more screwed up the models got, the more realistic they looked. Tony Barwick, the scriptwriter, used to adjourn with us in the bar and used to say, "Come on lads, got any ideas?" So I'd got to say to him, "Well, I quite fancy blowing up a big spaceship or a bridge or something," and he used to integrate a lot of that into the script. The original concept of the Zeroid actually came from, it was actually Gerry's idea, based on an effect that they'd used on, I think, a Space 1999 episode where they had these bouncing spheres where they'd shot them in reverse and what have you. And we basically, using that technique, that's in a wonder is how the concept of the Zeroid came around, a little spherical robot with shutters, what have you, that revealed his eyes and internal mechanisms and stuff. I did the basic design, and Richard Gregory and people built the puppet version. Although we had small scale, I think there were 2-inch diameter models of the Zeroids that we used to throw around and blow up on the model sets, you know. Most of the Zeroid bounce action was achieved by quite literally throwing a rubber ball version of them onto the set and then doing a jump cut when we went into the puppet version. And in order to get the Zeroid coming to life and rolling away, they used to quite often use like compressed air or something and just blow the football version of the rubber football version of the Zeroid away. And sometimes we'd run the cameras backwards to get that action in reverse. A couple of shots with the Zeroids assembling, I seem to remember, where I sort of stop motion animated them all coming to attention. The battle tank, if I remember rightly, that was based on a Tamiya Jeopard tank chassis, basically a commercially available kit, and Nick Finlayson and his guys customized that into the battle tank shape, and it was quite a robust model. And again, like most of the action in these kind of shows, it had to weather a lot of explosions. And I remember one incident where it actually had to go over a minefield, and the plan was to systematically detonate all the mines just as it cleared them. And I remember I think it had one too many in the bar at lunchtime or something, and I actually blew the model up into the ceiling. But bizarrely, even though it was damaged, it was back on the set within half an hour, courtesy of Nick and his guys, Nick Finlayson, the model maker. Zelda had these fighter craft called Zeefs, which were basically these ultra-fast, dynamic spacecraft. And we achieved a lot of the effects with them by actually sticking the Zeef on a stationary pole covered in black velvet against black, carefully lit, and we'd track the camera rapidly into the model, and then on cue a model maker would rotate the Zeef on the stand and we'd pan the camera off it to give the impression of it doing a rapid change in direction. And then after rewinding the film, we'd put a pan on the stars as well in order to make the movie even more dynamic. It was a conscious attempt to try and give everything this sort of dynamic Star Wars feel with state-of-the-art technology. Zelda had this fleet of craft that docked onto the central hub, which was our base in the pilot episode, which ultimately landed on Mars. If you look carefully in James Cameron's Aliens, you'll actually find one of, or a couple of Zelda's ships appearing in the sequence where Sigourney Weaver is recovering in an orbiting space hospital. In the establishing shot, if you look very closely, you see a couple of Zelda ships moving around within the orbiting hospital's structure, and it's one of those things, once you see it you can't miss them. So they had a life beyond Terrahawks, which was quite nice, and they also ended up being used as buildings in Space Precinct, which was another Gerry Anderson show, I think 10 years later, so they're still around. Terrahawks was very significant to me in that obviously it kick-started my career, but I learned a hell of a lot. It's like going to special effects film school in like 18 months. I was basically dropped in the deep end and had this mega crash course on visual effects and special effects and miniatures and what have you. And a lot of the techniques that I learnt on that show I've used in subsequent things such as James Bond films and Aliens, and more recently in Tomb Raider films. But I'm very grateful for being given that opportunity in that show, because I can't think of any other way you learn this stuff other than doing it for real.